How's it going, guys? We're back with another no-code automation that you can build right now for free. So this particular scenario was actually built for a client who was implementing HubSpot as their new CRM. As part of that process, they wanted to take invoices that they had in Xero, their accounting software, and import those invoices over into HubSpot. Then, to take it one step further, we wanted to automate the import of invoices from Xero to HubSpot whenever they get updated or created in Xero. So this is a perfect scenario for Make because Make is a no-code platform that allows you to integrate between software. So importing from Xero to HubSpot is easily done through Make. But before we even get into building the scenario, let's make sure we understand exactly what we're trying to do here. So when we look into Xero and the Xero API, we see a few values that are of interest to us, including the invoice ID and the invoice number, as well as the amount due and paid. So based on all the properties that we can pull for an invoice from Xero, we built a HubSpot custom object that reflected the properties that we cared about the most. So here we are in the Make scenario, and we can see that our trigger module is watching for invoices, and ultimately our scenario either updates a custom object record, which is our invoice object in HubSpot, or creates a custom object record, then associates it to, in this case, a company. Now, if we go into HubSpot, we can see this is what that final import table looks like. It has our invoice numbers, our invoice IDs, the company each invoice is associated with, the status of that invoice, so on and so forth. And this really provides us a great overview and a way of viewing overall revenue being generated by the company. So how do we actually build this thing? So we start by adding a Xero module to search for invoices. Now, we want to use a search module because it gives us a lot more control over what invoices we're actually returning while we're still testing. I would also recommend when you're importing data into your HubSpot instance to start with a sandbox environment. If you're paying for HubSpot, then that comes with a free sandbox environment, and that's where you want to be doing your testing, especially for data imported from third-party services. That'll just make sure that you don't mess up anything in your HubSpot production environment, and in case something does go wrong, you can always revert your sandbox environment. So we'll add some specifics for this search module in just a second, but in our second module, we're going to want to add a HubSpot CRM to search for CRM objects. Then for the object type to search, we'll need to map and find the object ID for our custom object by going to the custom object record in HubSpot and copying this ID from the domain. We can paste that into our object type to search. And now we just need to add our output properties that we're interested in. So if your output properties don't show up automatically, then just click out, save your scenario, and refresh. Then once you click back into your module, your output properties should show up automatically. Once we have our output properties, we can start determining which ones we want to keep. So I'll just refer over to the spreadsheet that I built earlier and start adding in all of the ones we want to keep. Now we need to tell HubSpot which invoice we're looking for, and we can do that by passing the invoice number as the query. Then, to make sure our search is efficient, we can add a filter based on the invoice ID. We denote the property name as the invoice number, the direction as descending, and the limit we can keep at 20. Now, this should only return one result since both the invoice number and the invoice ID should be unique. Now keep in mind, at the end of this scenario, we're going to want to associate our new HubSpot invoices with their respective companies. So then next we'll add another HubSpot CRM module that searches for another CRM object. But this time we're going to search for companies. And for the output properties, we're interested in the company name, the number of open deals, the record ID, the Xero invoice count, and the Xero contact ID, which is a unique identifier for each contact in Xero. Now for this search, we don't need any specific query, but we will also add a filter for the Xero contact ID. Based on the contact ID coming from our search module. For the property name, we'll make sure that that is the company name. And our limit doesn't matter too much here. Now from here, one of two things can happen to our data. Either our first search module returns a result, or it doesn't. If it does, that means that our invoice already exists in HubSpot and the record should be updated. If it doesn't, that means our invoice doesn't exist in HubSpot and it should be created. Because there's two different paths our data can take, for our next module, we'll add in a router. Now we can split that data off into two separate streams. Then in our first stream, we'll add another HubSpot module that creates a custom object record. We'll leave that there for now. And we'll add another HubSpot module to update a custom object record. And we'll leave that one for now as well. So let's think about the logic in this scenario for a second. Our first search module is searching for invoices in HubSpot matching an invoice that we find in Xero. So if this search fails, then no object record is going to be returned from this module. That means we can use the record ID from this search module as a trigger for what to do with our data. So I'll add a couple filters based on the record ID of our first search module to help us determine where our data should go. So leading to our create a custom object record, we can add a new filter for new invoices based on the output of our first search module and the record ID of it. Then we can use a basic operator that says does not exist. Now when data flows through to our create a custom object record that doesn't have a record ID, it'll be accepted through this filter. Then we can do the same thing from the data flow leading to our update a custom object record, where we set the condition for the record ID of our first search module existing. Now, if this module returns a record ID, that invoice will be updated. But if it doesn't return a record ID, a new invoice will be created. Now we can finish filling in our custom object record modules. And here we can see our object schemas. So our custom objects existing in HubSpot show up automatically for us, and we can click on Xero invoices. Then we can fill in the properties that we want to bring in from Xero. So if our keys are the HubSpot values that we want to import data into, then our values are where we're importing that data from. So from our Xero search module, we can start pulling in our key value data points. Then in our update a custom object record module, we'll need to add in our object ID again and our object schema, which is our Xero invoices. Now we add the properties just like we did before. Once we finish that, this scenario is basically done. However, we still want to add one more step that associates our new invoices with their respective clients. So in our create an association step, we'll start by setting this definition ID for custom objects. For our object type, we'll use that same number that we've been using for our Xero invoice custom object. From the from object ID, we're going to want to use the same invoice that we just created. So to do that, we'll pull the ID from the create a custom object module right before this association step. Now our to object will be companies. Now for our to object ID, we want this to be the company associated with the invoice that we just created. Thankfully, our second search module is searching for companies based on the invoices that we pass to it. So we can pull the ID from that module into our association step here. Now, because this is an association to a custom object, our category is going to be user defined, and our custom definition ID is actually a number that you'll have to find through HubSpot's documentation. There's a bit of code you'll need to run in order to get that ID. If you do have any trouble with that, feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to help. I already know that the custom ID here is 88. So with that, this scenario is basically done. The last thing we want to do is make sure we configure our search module to search by field, type, and accounts receivable, to make sure that we're only looking at invoices that we send out. So before we finalize this scenario, one thing to keep in mind is rate limiting issues. So we have a lot more fine control of how many results we're returning with a search module. However, if we're using a watch module here, it could return 1 or it could return 100 invoices. So most APIs have what's called a rate limit, which prevents you from overwhelming their servers with the amount of data you send them. In the case of Make, a rate limiting issue without any kind of error handling module is gonna completely freeze up your scenario. So to prevent that, what we wanna do is add just a few sleep modules that'll add some delays and make sure that we don't run into any of those rate limiting issues. Now you can also add these sleep modules after the fact once you've run your scenario and you can see where those rate limiting issues are. But for this particular scenario, I know those search modules both take up a lot of operations and it happens very quickly. And so those sleep modules are going to be really necessary. With that, this scenario is done. So this is connected to a client's production environment right now, so I can't run it for you, unfortunately. This video has been helpful. Thank you for sticking around and watching, and I'll see you guys next time.